Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to From the Hangar. It's our first episode, and we're going to do this podcast. It's going to be about all things aviation, brought to you by the Connecticut Air and Space Center in Stratford, Connecticut. We hope our stories are interesting, enlightening, and fun. So hopefully we'll keep going with this. Before we get to our guest today, I want to let everybody know about some of the events that are coming up for the Connecticut Air and Space Center in the next few months. May 3rd, Connecticut Air and Space Center is hosting our Corsair Day, where we celebrate the chance fought Corsair and the people who built it and whatnot. We have one on display, so you can actually see one. And by the way, it's the official aircraft of the state of Connecticut from back in 2005. Besides the Corsair displays and information we have in the museum, the highlight will be a presentation and a book signing by aviation photographer and author Stephen Chapis. He has written a new book entitled Poor Little Lambs, the Baa Black Sheep Story. It's all about the production of the 1970s TV series. It explores the development of the show, the episodes, the aircraft, and contains some amazing behind-the-scenes direct from the set. That's going to be on Sunday, March 3rd. So if you're a Corsair fan, you don't want to miss it. You can meet Stephen, get a book, have it signed. Then coming up on June 5th through the 7th is our very popular CAF Warbird Weekend. The Commemorative Air Force will spend 3 days at the museum on our ramp with 4 different World War II aircraft offering rides to the general public. You can pay for a ride and go in one of these amazing pieces of history. There will be a P-51, a T-6 Texan, a C-45 multi-seat Expediter, and a PT-17 Stearman biplane. And they can take anybody who wants to go up on an incredibly memorable flight. Anyone can come to the Connecticut Air Space Center to watch during the day. They're fun to watch and fly. Or you can purchase ride tickets beforehand from the CAF by simply logging onto our website at ctairandspace.org or a link to the CAF's website, which is airpowertour.org. All that's happening right in the museum in Stratford at Sikorsky Memorial Airport. Now, I'd like to get on to our first guest, our one and only guest today for our first episode. The first topic is going to delve into the history of aviation pioneer Gustave Whitehead, who was here in Connecticut. Our guest, Andy Kosch, is undoubtedly the world authority on Whitehead and his quest for flight. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm kind of excited about this. So tell me your story.
Well, Gustave Whitehead was a German immigrant who settled in Fairfield back around the turn of the century, 1900, and he was always interested in trying to fly. He built helicopters, toy helicopters, he built parachutes, he built model airplanes, and he wanted to fly from the time he was a young boy. When he got to Fairfield, actually he settled in Bridgeport, right over near Captain's Cove Seaport, and he built an airplane there, and he took that airplane and drove it right down the post road down to Fairfield by the beach in Fairfield, Jennings Beach, and he flew the darn thing. And I heard the story, and I got really interested in it, and I decided that I'm going to try to dig into this a little bit more. And so I hooked up with some other fellows who knew a lot about Whitehead, a guy named Bill O'Dwyer, who happened to have written a book right here called History by Contract. I'll tell you about that in a little while. I'd like to show you a picture of Whitehead's airplane. That's what it looks like. That white looks like a hang glider attached to a boat. Anyway, here is the very first book written about Whitehead. A woman named Stella Randolph worked for a gentleman who collected aviation articles, and he asked her to come to Bridgeport and take a look and see what she could find out about this guy, Gustave Whitehead, because there were newspaper articles in the paper in 1901 saying that Whitehead flew. So she did, in fact, come to Fairfield and Bridgeport, talk to some of the people who helped Whitehead build airplanes, and she spent the rest of her life trying to prove that Whitehead flew first. And so that's what I'm doing now, too. I've spent half my life trying to prove that Whitehead flew first.
So what drove you to that? Something drew you into that more than just, I like airplanes or...
Well, that's an interesting story. I went to a lecture at the History Museum in Fairfield, And it was on the history of aviation. So I thought it was going to be the Wright brothers. I was all excited because the Wright brothers were my heroes. You know, they built the first airplane. But in the audience, there were old people, older than I am now. I'm 86, and there were people 80 and 90 years old in the audience, and they were saying, my uncle helped Gustave Whitehead make the wings for the airplane, or my mother did such and such for Gustave Whitehead. And they had no reason to lie. There must have been a half a dozen people who were so excited about Whitehead. So I said, God, this has got to be true. These people wouldn't lie. Why should they lie? And so I decided that I was going to do something to help. And so I talked to the guy who was giving the lecture, a guy named Bill O'Dwyer. And I said, Bill, I think I could build that airplane and fly it. And he said, wow, if you could do that, he said, that would really help get credit for Whitehead. I said that because I was a hang gliding instructor at the time. And I was used to flying hang gliders, and Whitehead's airplane looks a lot like a hang glider. So I said, sure. So he gave me all the information I needed. He gave me some pictures. And I went over to Captain's Cove and talked to Kay Williams, the owner of Captain's Cove. He was just getting started with Captain's Cove Seaport. I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll build you a two-car garage, a hangar for your airplane, and I'll give you a budget. I'll give you $10,000 so that you can draw on that money for anything that you need. And so that was wonderful. I got started the next day. Now, I was working alone for quite a while, and old men used to wander in and say, hey, what are you doing here? You know, maybe I can help you. Guys that were carpenters, people that built model airplanes. And one of the very best guys was a teacher from Bullard Havens Technical School by the name of Bill Wargo. And he was also an expert model airplane builder and was a champion. He'd won a number of contests with his model airplanes. So he joined in and started working with me, and before long, we had an airplane. It took us about 1.5 years to build this airplane. I'd like to show you a couple more pictures. Here is a front view of the airplane, and there's Gustave Whitehead with his little 2-year-old. Oh no, his daughter's not here. This is not the picture with the daughter. This is a picture of his motor that drove the front wheels. He could drive this airplane on the road, and he drove it from Bridgeport all the way down to Fairfield, over to Jennings Beach, and then he flew it there. Here is a rear view of his airplane. So you can see how beautiful it is. You can see the dihedral in the wings, the shape of the wings, and it's just a gorgeous looking airplane. Now,
What year was that you started building it?
I started building in 1985.
Okay.
I heard the lecture probably around 1981, 82. Here's a better picture now, kind of a side view of the airplane, and Gustave Whitehead with his little daughter, Rose. That's his first child. And there's the engine that drove the front wheels, and he had 2 of those up top to turn the propellers. So
What kind of engine? What kind of engine was that?
it was a really strange engine. It was a modified steam engine, and he burned acetylene, and he made his own acetylene. When you drip water on calcium carbide, you produce acetylene, and somehow he ignited that acetylene, and gases were produced. When you burn acetylene, you get carbon dioxide and water or steam. And so he collected that in a collection tank and then fed it into a steam engine. So it was a strange engine. It was what they call a double-acting compound engine.
So it was a steam-powered airplane.
Steam-powered
Wow.
airplane. Yep.
Not many of those.
But it was lightweight. It
Right.
wasn't real heavy. People always hear about steam and they say, well, a steam engine is really heavy. Well, this was a lightweight steam engine.
Yeah, well, that image looks like there's just a few light pipes and a couple of pistons.
That's right.
Yeah.
It really is a little bit heavier, though. By the time we were all done, we think it weighed around 400 pounds.
Right.
A hang glider might weigh somewhere between 50 and 100 pounds.
And how much did Gustave Whitehead weigh?
Gustave Whitehead weighed about 180,
Okay.
185. Some people say he may have been close to 200, but I think it was around 180 pounds.
Yeah, because weight's so important when you're talking about flight.
It is.
Yeah.
He was a good-sized guy, though, and the airplane was powerful. Actually, before he came to Fairfield, he was living in Pennsylvania, and he had built an airplane just like this, and he had a real steam engine on it. He had a steam engine, and he had a passenger in the back of the airplane, and the passenger had to shovel coal or coke into the steam engine, and supposedly they flew about 10 or 15 feet off the ground for almost a half a mile, and they crashed into a building. They were going to try to go over the building, but they got too close and had no choice but to run into it. So that can't count as the very first flight because the plane crashed. Anyway, he built the same kind of an airplane in Fairfield, but he built a lighter motor, and he flew it all by himself.
What was that first flight? I mean, what was it like? Can you describe that?
Yeah, the first flight that he took, supposedly it flew for a half a mile, about 40 feet in the air. And that's unbelievable, especially when you compare it to the first flight of the Wright brothers that you read in the history books. Orville flew 120 feet, and the picture that you see, he's about 2 or 3 feet off the ground. And so that's another reason that people say, how could this guy do this on his first flight? Yeah. Well, really, it wasn't truly his first flight. He had lots of other little practice flights along the way. But his most famous flight was, it was observed by the editor of the Bridgeport Herald. And he was there and he saw Whitehead fly. And he wrote a full-page article describing everything that Whitehead said and what he did with pictures of the airplane. So that is what we think is the best piece of evidence that Whitehead flew.
Was he the only witness at that time? Or
oh no, there were. He had a couple of teenage boys who were helping him, and the editor of the Bridgeport Herald was there.
What's his background? I mean, because at the time anything was sensational. Oh my gosh, this balloon ascension is amazing, and was he prone to sensationalism in his writing? What was his background?
No, he wasn't. The fellow who saw this and eventually became the full-time editor of the paper. At first, he was the sports editor, and then he got into being the full-time, and he had a very good reputation. Everybody said that he was an honest fella, and he was there for more than 25 years, and so we tend to believe him.
Right.
The Smithsonian doesn't like to hear about that because naturally they want the Wright brothers to be the first to fly, and we think that Gustave Whitehead beat the Wright brothers.
So how did he control the airplane?
Well, he
left, right, up, down.
He talked about a couple of different ways of controlling it. One way that happens to appear in this 1901 Scientific American. There's an article in here about Whitehead, and he's talking about his airplane. He hadn't flown it yet, but he said he was going to speed up one engine and slow down the other one, so that one propeller, so he could turn the airplane that way. Another way that he did it, he had a tail that could move up and down, and so that would control pitch. Another way, he could warp the wings. He could change the shape of one wing by pulling on some wires. And when you change the shape of a wing, the airplane is going to tilt in one direction or another. Mm-hmm. So in this article, he was talking about using the propeller, differential thrust on the propellers.
And the Wright brothers used wing warping, right?
Yes, they did. The Wright brothers also used wing warping.
Now, I understand they actually came up here and visited him, or
that's
what have I heard?
That's what a couple of teenage boys who were working for Whitehead said, that they saw the Wright brothers come in and they were looking in the window and listening, and they could hear what the Wright brothers were saying and the discussion with Gustave Whitehead. And unfortunately, that's the only proof that we have as the teenage boys. And so the Smithsonian says, well, you can't trust these teenage boys. They were probably telling a tall tale. But if it was in Scientific American that Whitehead had an airplane and was going to fly it, don't you think the Wright brothers would have come to Bridgeport to see what the heck was going on?
Sure. And obviously, everyone's interested in flight. Many people trying. Certainly, whether you're on one side or the other of the Whitehead argument, he's an aviation pioneer. You cannot take that away from him.
Absolutely.
Okay. So did the Wright brothers, prior to this, did they visit any other people who were trying to fly? I know they used papers from Lilienthal and some of the studies that they did.
Otto Lilienthal was a German hang glider pilot, and he made over 2,000 flights right out in the general public so everybody could see him. And so he is really the father of flight. He's the pioneer who really opened up flying. He showed that man can fly an airplane or a hang glider, as it was. So, he was inspiration not only for Gustave Whitehead, but for the Wright brothers too. And since he was a German, Gustave Whitehead lived in Germany. He knew about Otto Lilienthal, and he may have worked with Lilienthal or met Lilienthal. It's a little bit cloudy exactly what the relationship was. But at one time, the Boston Aeronautical Society hired Gustave Whitehead to build an Otto Lilienthal hang glider.
Wow.
And Otto Lilienthal knew what that hang glider looked like, and so he built one, and that's in some of the books and journals that we have. So Whitehead was working on aviation with experts like the Boston Aeronautical Society.
Was Whitehead as methodical as the Wright brothers? The Wright brothers were pretty methodical about things and recording things and documenting and photographing. And we certainly have photographs of Whitehead's airplane.
Yes, yes. Well, Whitehead did save a lot of his stuff, but his wife supposedly threw a lot of this stuff out once he died because she didn't like the fact that he spent most of his time working on airplanes. They didn't have much money, and they had 4 children. They had 3 girls and a boy, and he wasn't making much money. He was working odd jobs. The rest of the time, he was trying to build airplanes.
Does he have any photos of that first flight, or?
There are no photographs because the cameras of the day were not that great. It was the wee hours of the morning that he was flying. It was just the sun coming up. And instead, the editor of the paper drew a picture. I believe that he did have a photograph, but it wasn't clear. So he made a lithograph of the photograph.
Okay.
And that's what we see in the Bridgeport Herald, which came out on August 18th. It was a Sunday paper, so it only came out on Sunday. The Smithsonian says, well, why didn't he, if he flew on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, why wasn't it front page news? Well, it was only a Sunday paper.
Did the Wright brothers get it in that day in the paper?
That's a good question.
All right.
No, the Wright brothers had some difficulty. Once they wrote a note to their father and said, hey, we flew, and, the father was pretty happy. And as soon as some of these newspaper people got a little hint that this happened, they made up all kinds of wild stories that the Wright brothers were going to carry 4 tons of machinery equipment and they were going to fly so far. So newspaper people tend to do that. They make up some good stories, and sometimes it's hard to find out, what is the truth.
Right, and that that comes to mind is the AP reporter, the reporter that saw this, the editor. He didn't seem to sensationalize it like that. The future of aviation. There were some other people there. There were some of the boys that were working with him. Was there anybody else? So what would you say? 5 or 6 people watched this happen?
With Gustave Whitehead, well, what we know of for sure is that 2 of his teenage boys were there, and the editor of the newspaper was there. Those are the three people that we know for sure. We think there were probably some others, but he didn't talk about them.
You know, looking at through history, you know, there were a lot of things that happened that no one ever saw.
Right.
But you know, you take a Medal of Honor. If you were to be awarded the Medal of Honor for action in combat, it takes a minimum of two people's statements for that to even be considered for the Medal of Honor.
Right.
But if you don't have two people's statements, it didn't happen. Mm-hmm. Well, here's three. You've got three people.
We do have three people
making statements, and you know, there's not a lot of photographs of Medal of Honor awardees, you know, doing what they did. But two people could say, yeah, that's what he did, and it's okay. So it kind of equates to the same thing. If there's multiple people say this, why isn't that acceptable?
Well, later on that day, he supposedly made a couple of other flights too. And we don't have as great evidence on that. We only have people said they saw him do it. Some of his helpers saw him do it. Stella Randolph, the woman who wrote the first book about Whitehead, claims that in addition to that first flight that he made of a half mile, that he made a couple of other flights. One of them was 2 miles. Another one was, I think it was about 200 feet in the air. So we can't be sure about those because we didn't have the editor of the newspaper. You really have to look at who are the eyewitnesses. Is he reputable? And certainly the editor of a newspaper, I think, is reputable.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So, you know, here he flew, and obviously there's been reports of longer flights. You know, what did he do to follow up with this? When, you know, did he follow up, continue to try flying for years?
Yes, he did. He opened up, he enlarged his shop. He had newspaper articles saying he was going to build an airplane that would carry 6 or 10 people. He was going to fly to New York. He had all kinds of hope. There were articles in the paper saying that he had something like a half a dozen engineers who came in to work with him on his airplane. The trouble was he didn't have really good backing. He didn't have a lot of money. And some people would give him money to build them an airplane or to build them a helicopter, to build them a motor for a boat, and he would use the money sometime on his airplane. And so he wasn't a very good businessman, and that got him into a little trouble.
Yeah, not as methodical as the Wrights, but...
not as methodical,
yeah,
right.
why does his story seem to have been buried over the years? You know, people talk about it, and, you know, I was watching Men with Wings, the 1939 movie with Frankenberry.
Yes, right.
And there's a model of that in there, and then they try to fly one, and it looks exactly like Whitehead's, only they launch it off a cliff.
Right, they launched it,
but it's exactly like it in 1939.
Right, but they knew what Stella Randolph did right here. Stella Randolph wrote this book, and she put pictures of the airplane in it.
Yeah.
They made that movie without permission. They took Stella Randolph's book, they made the movie, and they, in fact, in the movie, Whitehead crashes, and I think he gets killed in the thing, but it's not the true story.
Yeah, and it's not Whitehead, it's another, you know, it's a story.
Right, and the airplane looks a lot like a Whitehead airplane, but that was done all illegally.
Right. I get it. So, you know, I know you talked about the flights in 85. How did those go?
Oh, that was great.
The one you built.
Well, in 1985, before we even tried to fly the airplane with a motor, we towed the airplane on the back of a little trailer pulled by a small sports car. And we had the airplane chained down so that it could lift up 2 feet off the trailer, but it couldn't go anywhere else. And so we did that a number of times, and we proved to ourselves that this thing can fly. This thing can lift a man up. I was in the airplane when it lifted off the trailer, and it would just fly right along. So after a few weeks of that, one day we just decided we're going to go for it. We put the motor on the darn thing, and we just went out, and I was taxiing around with Morgan Kaolian, the airport manager, was right alongside me with the car. And I was just taxiing, trying to get used to the airplane, and all of a sudden it leaped off the ground and got up about 5 or 6 feet in the air. It scared the heck out of me. And I didn't expect it. I said, wow, this is wonderful. This thing wants to just fly. So once I got over that first fear that I had when I left the ground, we decided to put the airplane away. It was starting to get dark. And we went back out again in a couple of weeks, and we decided we're going to really go for it this time. And so I made maybe 15 or 20 flights. Each time I'd go a little further. And at first, the guys on the side of the runway were going like this. And that's how far I was off the ground. I didn't know it. I said, what the heck are they doing? I didn't realize it was so steady and so smooth that I wasn't aware that I was flying. So we did that a few times on one weekend, and then about 2 weeks later, we decided, let's really go for this. Let's see how far we can go. So I made a few flights, and we had a newspaper there, we had a newspaper photographer, and we had state police there, we had airport managers there, we had firemen there, we had policemen there. And I decided to really build up a lot of speed and go down the runway. And once I left the ground, I just kept the throttle forward. I wanted to see how far I could go. Previously, my flights were maybe 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet. This time I flew over 300 feet. Unfortunately, the photographer for the Bridgeport Post, actually it was the Bridgeport Post, Wayne Ratzenberger, he was the head photographer. He was out in the middle of the runway, and I'm here trying to break a record. So I'm hoping he's going to move because I'm heading for trying to go as far as Whitehead did. He went for a half a mile. So unfortunately, he ran to the right, and I turned to the right trying to avoid him, and I hit the photographer. And
wow.
That happened about 330 feet away from where we started. Even the Wright brothers said that in order to count as a flight, you have to go at least 300 feet. So I was happy that we went 330 feet, but we broke Wayne Ratzenberger's arm and split his head open.
Wow.
But I jumped in the ambulance with him. I woke him up. They told me he was dead. I woke him up and jumped in the ambulance, and we went to Bridgeport Hospital, and they patched him up, and we were still friends after that.
Here's the key. He's a photographer. Did he get the shot?
He got the shot.
Okay.
It was on the front page of the newspaper the next day on Sunday.
So let me ask you a question. What are you doing today to, further this? I mean, you did those test flights, and, and obviously you're out talking about it and whatnot, but anything going on today? These days?
Well, yes, because the Smithsonian still doesn't want to accept it. They said, well, our plane wasn't exactly like Whitehead. We didn't have the same motor, so they won't accept anything. But what I want to do now is build another Whitehead airplane that looks exactly like the one I flew, except it has electric motors on it, because electric motors are quiet, more dependable, and I would like to bring it to different air shows and just demonstrate it so people can see the Whitehead plane fly. I know it's not exactly what Whitehead did, but I want people to study about Whitehead, read about Whitehead.
Yeah. How soon might that happen?
I think it's going to happen this year.
Great.
I have a gentleman farmer, a tobacco farmer, who's going to let me use one of his hangars, an airplane hangar up in Somers, Connecticut. He's a tobacco farmer, and he's got his own runway. He's got a half-mile runway on his property. So I'm just waiting for all the snow to melt. We're going to get up there, hook up this electric-powered airplane, and see if it flies well, and if it does, we'll start making arrangements to go to every air show we can get into.
Sounds great.
And demonstrate.
Great. Well, Andy, thank you for coming. This is Whitehead's always been an interest, especially here in Connecticut.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
I want to thank the Connecticut Air and Space Center, Soundview here, Sean Corvino, and President of Connecticut Air and Space Center, Mark Corvino. If you like the podcast, please share it with anybody else. Tune in next time for more stories from the hangar, and thanks for listening.